Hey, welcome to episode 1 of the Gtown Breakdown. I'm Holden Tuma. I'm going to be your host. And before I get fully into what this show is going to be, I wanted to touch on who I am in the event that you are not aware, just to give a little bit of credibility to where I'm coming from. So, my name is Holden Tuma. I am a junior this year at Southwestern University, and I've lived in Georgetown my whole life. I've gone to pretty much every Georgetown school, including GHS. I've played football there, and something that I've always wanted to do ever since I was a kid was be a broadcaster. And so my senior year at GHS, I was offered a position to join the SHN broadcast crew that was covering Georgetown high school sports, which was absolutely a no-brainer for me. And after that season, I was invited to stay full-time on the crew, and which led me to staying local at Southwestern so that I could continue doing SHN without having to worry about driving 3 hours here and there and all over the place. So that led me here. This is my 4th season with the team, and over this past summer, I had the idea to create a dedicated weekly recap show going over all the things that happened in the previous week regarding Georgetown high school sports, in particular football, which leads us here. This is episode 1, so therefore, obviously, we're going to be going over the week 1 game between Georgetown and Victoria East that happened last Friday. What you can expect from this show, again, it's going to be a dedicated recap show, so in the event that you might have missed a game, this is going to try to touch on all the things you might have missed to give you all the information you maybe need for the next game. That way, your background information is filled in. Alternatively, this is also going to be a more detailed analysis and breakdown, hence the name, of what occurred the week before. Some of the stuff that we can't really get into or don't have the time to get into during our actual broadcast, this will be where you find that. And so it's going to be multifaceted. Again, and it's also going to grow as the season progresses. This is, again, week 1, the first episode. So this could absolutely be overhauled and changed and all kinds of things. And I'll update you guys as that happens or if that happens. But we're going to grow with each other, so to speak. But yeah, this is week 1, episode 1, and it's a pleasure to have you here. So I won't waste any more of your time. This will be the quick game recap of what occurred last Friday. So Georgetown went southeast about 2.5 hours to face off with Victoria East. They won the game 27-0. It was a pretty interesting game. I don't think anybody really expected the result we got. Maybe they expected the win, but maybe not how we got there. And this is going to be just a quick recap of the big events, the big plays that occurred that really drove the momentum of the game. So again, this is not going to be a total breakdown of everything that occurred, just kind of touching on the big stuff, and then we'll get more nuanced a little bit later. So firstly, it was a pretty slow start for Georgetown. Their offense in the first 2 drives totaled 29 yards, and they punted in both of those possessions. We're really used to seeing these last couple of years Georgetown's offense starting hot. They love to receive the ball because they were so confident in their ability to go down and score on their first drive, which puts their defense which puts the opposing offense and defense immediately at a disadvantage, because instead of executing the preset game plan with a tied game, now you're trying to execute a game plan when you're behind and your defense has already lost confidence. So it was a bit, I wouldn't say jarring, but just a different style of game that occurred today. And there was a lot of factors that can go into that. We can touch on that a little bit later, though. So again, Georgetown's offense a bit slow. First 2 drives, no points, 2 punts. But the defense came up clutch right after that. The Victoria East's first play after a punt, they tried to run a pretty slow developing play action, and the pressure from Georgetown was immediately in the face of Victoria East's QB. It forced an errant throw, which was intercepted by Malachi Miller, which then turned the very next play on offense into a deep strike touchdown from Caleb McDougal to Xavier Warren, a 32-yard strike to open up the score. After that, the next scoring drive for Georgetown was sparked by a 40-yard catch on the near sideline by Xavier Warren. It was just a simple go ball, and it was well thrown. Something that you might have noticed if you were watching, that the wind in that game was pretty rough if you were trying to throw into it, which Georgetown was in the first quarter, but this was in the second quarter, and now McDougal had the wind at his back, and so this ball came out much prettier than a lot of the passes we saw earlier in the game. But again, a 40-yard catch sparked this next scoring run. And who did score? Weston Stewart. Get used to the name. This was his first touchdown of the day. It was a 6-yard run about 2 minutes before halftime. And that was his first of many. And then first drive coming out of halftime, Georgetown's up 14-0. Victoria East presumably made some adjustments, had a game plan ready to go, and they immediately lost a fumble. The first drive back out, which completely stymies any sort of game plan that Victoria East came into the half with. Any sort of strategy or structure they tried to assemble, completely out the window. GT recovers the fumble. They ultimately do not score on this drive. They march down to Victoria East's 28, but they turn it over on 4th and 12. They had an opportunity to hit Copeland Madre with a seam ball down the middle of the field, but it was an excellent play by Isaiah Taylor to break the pass up in the end zone. Otherwise, it would have been a touchdown strike. So shout out to him, made a heck of a play. Georgetown turns it over. After a punt from Victoria East, Weston Stewart breaks free for a 46-yard touchdown run, his second of the day. That makes it 21-0 in about the mid-third. Next scene I've got, Victoria East drove down all the way to Georgetown's 22-yard line, which is the farthest they ultimately made it all day. They were, again, ultimately stymied on 4th and 10 from Georgetown's 26, which they turned it over. And then Georgetown marched all the way down to Victoria East's 15, and they turned it over on 4th and 3. Finally, the other two big things I've got, Georgetown later recovers yet another fumble in the late 4th, and then the offense turns that into another score. It was a Weston Stewart 2-play drive. His first run went for 32, and then he finished the drive with another 8-yard touchdown run with 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It was 27-0. The final PAT was botched, so 27-0 was the final score. As you might have noticed, Georgetown's offense was a little up and down in that game. Rushing the ball, however, was down for maybe a quarter and then way up the rest of the game. Rushing the ball, Weston Stewart, 8 carries for 108 yards and 3 touchdowns. Zechariah Guyton, 15 carries for 108 as well. Jet Walker had 4 carries for 23 yards. In total, the team had 235 total rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, and averaged 8.4 yards a carry. Now, I did gloss over Jet Walker, and obviously he is the big question mark in regards to this game. Jet came in for maybe the first 2 drives or so, and then was pulled and did not return. And in his absence, we had a big question mark. Something that I actually noted before the game that we weren't able to get into in a bit of a rushed pregame was that there were a lot of quality depth pieces from last year's team that were no longer here, including the backup running backs. In fact, yes, if I remember correctly, which I do, the leading returning rusher behind Jet Walker from last season was Xavier Warren, the wide receiver, with 50 yards. Every other running back who had more yards than him is no longer with the team, either graduated or transferred or moved away, anything like that. So there was a big question mark in regards to the depth at running back, and Weston Stewart and Zachary Guyton answered the call. Passing the ball was a bit of a struggle, and I think Georgetown would be the first one to admit that. Now, there were a lot of other exterior factors that played into that. The wind was pretty rough, and again, it was a week one game, a windy day, an away game. A lot of those things can kind of influence into that. McDougal ended up finishing the day 7 for 20 for 103 yards and that 1 touchdown to Xavier Warren, the first score of the game. And we never really asked him to be highly efficient in moving the ball because we never needed him to. But passing was definitely not the prettiest day for the aerial assault. And then obviously that coincides with the receiving game. Xavier Warren had 3 catches, 73 yards, and 1 score. Copeland Madre had 2 receptions for 19 yards, and the other 2 receivers had 1 catch apiece. So it was not an eye-popping day statistically for the air attack, but running the ball more than made up the slack on their end and really kind of carried that offense. So overall, Georgetown's offense ran 49 plays. They had 338 yards and still averaged 7 yards a play. So even with their passing offense being large, defensively is a little bit trickier to gauge because I'm having to eyeball all these stats while I'm inputting them. And so it's kind of tricky to look up at the field and look down at my computer and try to look up at the field in regards to who made tackles. I typically try to find the last person to get off of a pile. Sometimes if it's an isolated tackle, it's pretty obvious who made the call or who made the hit. But sometimes tackle numbers can get a little dicey, so these might not be entirely accurate. But I just wanted to pre-emphasize that before I get into the defensive numbers, just in case they differ from Georgetown's official postings or official numbers. That is 100% possible. I fully, readily admit that. Um, but what I had today was a lot of high impact players all across the board. Quinton Rock, 5 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. I had Gavin Smith with 5 tackles as well. Easton Smith had 2 tackles and the sack. Malachi Miller, of course, I mentioned earlier, 3 tackles and that interception. We had 5 total tackles for loss in that game. And Georgetown's defense was just incredible the entire game. There was no sluggishness. There was no cat getting up to game speed with them from the first snap to the final snap. Georgetown's defense was completely locked in this entire game. They held Victoria East to 31 carries for 84 yards. That is less than 3 yards a carry. It's 2.7, which is not where any offense wants to be. Passing the ball, they had to implement 2 different quarterbacks, neither of which were entirely effective. They were 13 of 26 for 79 yards throwing the ball. The only receiver to have a catch in the game was Zion Dorian. He went for 3 catches, 27 yards, and he was a very talented guy, but he was pretty much effectively removed from the entire game. Every other catch was made by a running back out of the backfield. And then finally, the longest Victoria East play they had all day was a 15-yard QB scramble on 2nd and 36 when Georgetown's defense was playing prevent, don't give up a first down, don't give up a big play. The QB ran out for 15. That was the first drive of the game. Think about that. That was the first drive of the game. Victoria East had a 15-yard play. They never matched that again. They never got anything more than 15 yards. Like that, I cannot praise Georgetown's defense enough in this game. Additionally, they held Victoria East to 5 of 13 on 3rd down. Victoria East was 0 for 2 on 4th. They had 3 fumbles. They lost 2 of them. Obviously, they had that interception. In total, they ran 57 plays for 163 yards, averaging 2.9 yards a play. And just for comparison, last year, Georgetown's opponents averaged 5.7 yards a play. Again, that is an entire season statistically. So, of course, that's probably a bit more naturalized of a statistic. But still, this is an incredible start for a defense that was missing a lot of guys if you take everything into consideration. All the new faces that they had to replace. We're going to get into that a little bit later, maybe a little bit of foreshadowing here. But there was a ton of new faces on the defense, and all of them stepped up to the plate. So, I cannot give enough credit to this Eagles defense for really smothering Victoria East and allowing Georgetown's offense to try to get in rhythm, try to figure things out, and eventually start stretching the little bit as the game progressed. Now, as I was hinting at a little bit earlier, I'm going to be choosing game MVPs, one from offense, one from defense every week. And this week, it was tough for sure because I came into this game with not an expectation, but I came into this game with a preconceived notion, I guess, of what kind of how I thought it would go. And well, some of it was correct, a whole bunch of it was not correct. And so it was just a little bit, again, different of a game than I expected, which ultimately led to a lot of different guys being up there in the running for who I wanted to pick to be an MVP. But ultimately, I actually picked 13 MVPs. I picked 2 on offense, and I picked the entire Georgetown defense as my MVPs. And so offensively, Weston Stewart and Zach Guyton, the running backs, stepped up in such a monumental way. Again, as a bit of a reminder, Weston Stewart had 8 carries for 108 yards and 3 touchdowns. He averaged 13.5 yards a carry, and Zach Guyton had 15 carries for 108 yards, averaging 7.2. Then they both stepped up when it mattered. And again, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the depth coming into this year at running back was completely unproven. Talented, absolutely, but completely unproven. Like the leading rusher who returned from last year behind Jet Walker was Xavier Warren with 50 yards. So these two had no idea what a varsity environment was like, what varsity reps were going to feel like, what a varsity hit was going to feel like, and they both stepped up in a monumental way and really put this Georgetown offense on their back in a big-time game, which is why I leaned them over the offensive line, because the offensive line had a little bit more continuity to it. Some new faces there as well, yes, but these two had never played at the varsity level, either of them, and they both excelled in a huge way, making people miss first and big plays when we needed it. And again, really facilitating the entirety of Georgetown's offense. So a huge shout out to Weston Stewart and Zach Guyton for the week one offensive MVPs. And defensively, as I said earlier, it's every single player. I could not find it in myself to try to isolate one or two or three or however many, because all of them stepped up in such a monumental way. I touched on this a bit earlier, but the sheer amount of missing pieces from last year is really astonishing. I'm going to run off some names that I'm sure you're familiar with. Seth Warren, Jaheim Dowd, Andrew Urban, Luke Birch, Cooper Wirtchen, Chance Kelly, Luke Hawley, Dylan Tuberville, all of which are gone and graduated, all of which were starters last season and had to be replaced. In fact, Cole Mitchell this season was the only returning player in the top 6 tacklers from last season, and he didn't even play in the game. So he was out. The only senior returning leader they had was Tennyson Dean on that defensive line. Everybody else was a fresh face in there, somebody who didn't have a lot of reps, somebody who was asked to step into a much bigger role in the first week of the season on a road game, a long trip, a windy day. And they stepped up and completely shut down Victoria East's offense and gave Georgetown's offense time to figure things out, time to lock in, time to figure out how they wanted to attack, time to figure out their identity. And that is why I cannot just isolate it to one guy. I would love to go Malachi Miller. He had the clutch interception to really start things off. Or Quentin Rock. He had the 5 tackles, was all over the field. And while all of that's true, I don't think you can take away from the other guys who were so vital in facilitating how effective that defense was. So everybody on the defense, again, a huge round of applause. They held Victoria East to 2.9 yards a play. They were under 100 yards, both receiving, passing, and rushing, and they were completely unaffected by a quarterback change mid-game. And that's probably the most impressive part, because a lot of times you'll see when a QB switch happens, the other team might get a spark, might just get a jolt of energy. And whether that's because maybe the defense hasn't prepped for this backup quarterback or this offense just kind of rallies behind him. Sometimes you see that backup QB start rattling off some successful drives. There was maybe 3 successful plays that the backup QB ran. Outside of that, there was nothing. Victoria East had nothing going for them all day. They had one drive that made it into Georgetown's 25-yard line, and they got nothing out of it. Again, I cannot express enough how exceptional this Georgetown Eagles defense played. It was a completely remarkable performance, and again, totally blew my expectations away. I was talking before the game that I thought maybe the offense would have to be the one that kind of takes the charge. They had some more returning starters. They had Jet Walker back, Caleb McDougal back, Xavier Warren back. Maybe they'd have to score a lot of points to give the defense time to kind of round into form, just because they're trying to replace so many talented guys with other talented but inexperienced guys. And that wasn't the case at all. Georgetown's defense from the first snap was completely locked in, completely stymied anything Victoria East was doing. Next up, I've got a couple takeaways from the game, some good takeaways, and then some things that we can try to look to work on in the coming weeks. So firstly, I have to preemphasize that this is week 1, and only foolish men make conclusions in week 1. God gave us months of football season to make conclusions. You cannot do it at week 1 because the sample size really is not there. So with that out of the way, this defense has backfilled exceptionally well. I mean, I was just talking about that with the MVPs, but the amount of sheer talent that was lost at graduation that they've had to replace and who did not skip a beat. I mean, if you had told me that was last year's defense out there, I wouldn't have batted an eye. In fact, I would have probably been shocked at how well they were playing. Not to knock on last year's defense at all, but just the sheer ferocity, the sheer energy, like every play living in the backfield. It was completely dominant from a conceptual perspective, from a schematic perspective, from a just personnel perspective. A completely dominant day for Georgetown Eagle defense. A huge shout out to them once again. Secondly, the running back room has plenty of depth, which is a big thing, especially considering Jet Walker's status is kind of in the air. I know we talked about him. He came in for about 2 drives or so and then was pulled. We're not sure if he has an injury, if he's going to be able to play next week, what his availability is going to be. And so getting to those other guys a lot of quality reps for the majority of that game and having them excel the way they did. They were my offensive MVPs today. But is such a sigh of relief for this offense because Georgetown is really built around running the ball, then the play action pass built around that. And if you can't run the ball, Georgetown's entire offensive scheme is kind of up in the air because then the defense does not have to respect the fact that you can run the ball. And it's not even just that schematically you run it, it's personnel wise. Do you have the talent to maybe take a play that's schemed for 5 yards? Can you take that for 8? Can you take that for 12? Can you take that for 60 for a touchdown? Like we saw Jet do a lot last year. And it definitely seems like in that first week, that explosive pop running the ball was still there, which is a huge, huge benefit for this offense. Because if they can continue to find explosive plays running the ball, which is, as everybody knows, a lot safer than throwing, if you can still reliably get those 25-yard pops, those 30-yard explosions, and those 70-yard breakaway runs, then that offense is going to be that much more lethal. So that is why it is really, really promising to see quality depth playing that well whenever their number's called on. And then thirdly, I did touch on this in the first takeaway that I had, but this Georgetown defensive front completely manhandled Victoria East to the point that schematically, Victoria East went into this game trying their absolute hardest to nullify Georgetown's front. And what do I mean by that? If you look back at the game, I believe from what I recall, there were 2 passes thrown 10 plus yards down the field the entire game because Victoria East knew they couldn't block Georgetown's defensive front. They couldn't hold up long enough to allow the routes to develop down the field. Pretty much all of their catches were quick outs or screen plays, something to try to get the ball out quick out of the QB's hands. They had a lot of rollouts. A QB snaps the ball and then runs to the right or left, depending on what he's more comfortable throwing, to a quick out to the outside. Again, something to move the pocket, something to get away from the pass rush. The Victoria East came into that game doing that on their first drive because they knew from film from last season, from maybe personnel and the offseason and training camp, that they probably could not block Georgetown's defensive front, and they couldn't. Georgetown's defensive front caused that interception by Malachi Miller. The pressure caused that errant throw, caused Victoria East to run a very ineffective offensive scheme in the hopes that maybe they could dink and dunk for 16 plays and score, which they could not do. Again, that all starts up with that front defensive line. If that front defensive line is not getting the dominant pressure that they were, Victoria East's playbook opens all the more. And so because Georgetown's defensive group was that ferocious and that quick to getting off the ball, getting through the blocks, then that really helps everybody else in the defense, but it also really limits what the other offense can do, which in turn helps the defense because it's a lot easier to defend a 3-yard out than like a 20-yard scissor concept with a play action element and all these kind of bells and whistles. So again, a big shout out to the defensive line. Was really impressed from what I saw from them. Now, 2 things to look at and trying to improve going forward. Firstly, the offensive passing game, and that's a little bit an obvious one, but I wanted to specifically focus on who the wide receiver 2 in this offense is, because obviously wide receiver 1 is Xavier Warren, and that's never been in question. He's probably the most dynamic player outside of Jet Walker on that offense with his speed, and he can just kind of run past any defense, which forces the defense to always have eyes on him, maybe 2 players' eyes on him. He's the most dynamic receiver we have. And then the question is who's going to be the consistent guy next to him. Last year, it was Davin Sedgwick, who really burst onto the scene. He played a little bit the year before that, and then he kind of became that wide receiver 1, the possession guy, the guy we went to if we needed a first down, the red zone potentially, and that allowed Xavier to be more of the gadget, the screenplay, and take it and run for 50 yards, the go ball guy, the post ball, kind of the Tyreek Hill of sorts, more of the big threat that the defense has to always be on guard for, and if they make a mistake, Xavier will make them pay. The issue is if Xavier does not have a big-time complement at the other receiver spots, then the defense isn't as stressed out because there's not 2 guys that can break them over the middle. There's 1 guy, and then there's a couple of solid rotational pieces or solid guys but the defense isn't worried about them catching the ball and taking it for 50 yards at any given time. So the question is who's wide receiver 2? Obviously, Braden Westfall was out last week, so I expected him to try to probably fight for that position. Copeland Madre had 2 catches for 19 yards. He got a look in the end zone at 4th down. He was targeted quite a bit. He could also threaten for that wide receiver 2 position. It was not a great day for the passing game in general. Again, very windy, kind of hard to get in an early rhythm. So not drawing any conclusions about how good this passing game is from a week 1. Just kind of questioning, okay, looking forward, who's going to step up in that wide receiver 2 role to really take this offense to the next level, take the pressure off Xavier Warren, and put all the pressure in the world on that defense to try to figure out how are you going to stop the run, how are you going to stop Xavier Warren, how are you going to stop Braylon Westfall, Copeland Madre, any of the other receivers who might want to step up and have a breakout year. And then secondly, the situational game was also a struggle for Georgetown most of the day, and I think they would probably be the first one to acknowledge that as well. Georgetown offensively was 2 of 8 on 3rd down. They were 0 for 3 on 4th. All 3 of those turnovers on downs occurred in Victoria East territory, one of which was in the red zone, one was right outside the red zone, and then one was around the 32-yard line. And those type of things that they can really make or break offensively, and they can really make or break games, because when you drive down the field, let's say you get the ball at the 20 of a punt, and then you drive 60 yards and you go all the way into the opposing team's red zone, and you get down at 4th and 3 at the 10, and they stop you. Now you've spent 6 minutes, 5 minutes or so, and got nothing out of it, and that defense is fired up for the next drive because they went all the way down, gave up all these yards, and you come away with nothing. And that's always an energy boost to that defense, and it's an energy drain for that offense because it's the same thing but inverse. They spend all this energy, they spend all these time, all these plays, all these ideas, all this execution to get down the field, to get so close, and they come up with nothing. And we saw this a lot in college football this weekend, the Texas-Ohio State game. Texas had so many opportunities to go down the field and score from the 1-yard line, from the 3-yard line, from the 9-yard line, and they could not do it on 4th down, and they turned it over, which just galvanized Ohio State's defense. The same kind of thing here. Anytime that Georgetown might be playing an opponent down the line, if they're continuing to turn it over on 4th and 2, 4th and 3, if they are not able to execute on the highest leverage moments of the game, it's just going to make that job even tougher the next time out because that defense is going to get all the confidence back from that stop, and that offense is going to lose some confidence because it's human nature. When you get stopped from doing something, it's human nature to come out the next time and be like, man, we had a great drive and they stuffed us. Now, you can go 2 ways with that. You can go, they stuffed us, now I'm going to stuff their face in and go punch them in the face. Or you could take that and it can really sink into you and you'd be like, man, they stopped us. Like, we can't get anything going. Our best plays aren't working. And it gets in your head. And that's when you start seeing the snowball effect offensively. So, again, it's week 1. A lot of time to work all this stuff out. This is no means a final say on how good this offense is or what the high-end ceiling of this offense is by any means. This is week 1. Week 1 is for observations, not conclusions. But that's just some things that I'm looking at, trying to notice going forward, things to potentially improve on, things to pay attention to. Also, the penalties, 6 penalties for 65 yards was the final tally. Again, it's week 1. Penalties weren't a dire issue in this game. There were, again, 6 is not it's not nothing, but they did not break Georgetown's offense or defense terribly badly. Obviously, you want to get that cleaned up, but it was not a glaring issue that was like eye-popping, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So it's week 1. It was an away game. We'll see what happens this week, at home against Belton. Home versus the Belton Tigers, who are 1-0. They beat Hendrickson 21-17 last week. They overcame a 10-0 deficit in the second quarter. So obviously, still a lot of game to be played, but something to be said about resilience, perseverance, that sort of thing. Belton's quarterback, Will Shepard, just really quickly, is an incredibly talented individual. He had 2 touchdowns in the win against Hendrickson, including a 50-yard bomb down the far sideline from the near hash. So probably about 55 air yards or so. And it was a beautifully thrown pass. If you could find the highlight on Max Preps, go check it out. Again, huge props to that throw. This kid's clearly an incredible player. He's going to really pressure Georgetown's defense. So Georgetown's defense is going to have another challenge ahead of them. Again, they played very well last week, so I have no doubt they're up to meeting that. But they cannot have a come-to-earth moment here because Shepard could probably light them up a bit. On the other side, Hendrickson's passing game also had success against Belton secondary, in particular in kind of broken play scenarios. Now, obviously, an offensive game plan is not, hey guys, let's go break our play. So hopefully defensively they break two and we get a touchdown. That's not a game plan. So you're not going to expect Georgetown to start running around really nilly and like hope to get a big play. But that is something to consider if McDougal ever has to scramble out and try to create after the snap, after the play breaks down. There is some precedent to finding success against Belton secondary, like Hendrickson did, throwing the ball down the field. So look for that to be another critical point of emphasis in the week to practice. There's no official statistics from this game. I would love to throw the numbers at you guys, but they don't release them. Or at least they didn't release them for this game. So I don't have the specific stuff. But generally, those are the two big things that I noticed while watching the highlight recap of the game last week. Will Shepard, Belton quarterback, is a game wrecker. And then on the other side, Belton secondary has some question marks. As I said earlier, you can't really draw conclusions from week one. At least intelligent people do not draw conclusions in week one. And so a lot of this stuff, obviously, probably a bit reactionary. But at the same time, a lot of the foundational stuff that I saw, that all the broadcasters saw, and you might have seen if you watch the game, they're all still there. And so a lot of the stuff that I mentioned today, while the passing game might like have looked a little shaky at times last week, they could explode for 500 yards and it gets belted. And just like that, we forget all about the 100-yard performance. So there's a lot of variance still to come because we have such a small sample size. We don't have a true feel for what this offense and really what this defense is going to look like for the rest of the season. But just foundational stuff that we saw from week one, stuff that to build on potentially, there's a lot of promise to be had with Georgetown, both offensively and of course defensively. The sky's the limit for this team. They have obviously some questions to answer, like every team does, but this team has everything still in front of them. It's an incredibly talented group. It's a well-coached group. And I have no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a team that's, when district time comes around, it's going to be at the top echelon competing for that district title. This is a team that can do anything they set their mind to. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Again, they came in with a lot of questions, answered some of them, have some more. That's why football season's a couple months. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you for tuning in to episode 1 of the Gtown Breakdown. Again, this is going to be a weekly show, so if you enjoyed, there'll be plenty more to come for the weeks to come. And I will update you guys on how this is going to look, if there's any changes, that sort of thing. But yeah, feel free to give me feedback, please. I encourage feedback. Any sort of ideas, any questions you guys have, throw them my way. I'll do my best to answer. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.